after suffering. You see the video link that inspired all of the following. Muji tells the story at 10 minutes and 10 seconds into the video. A man who reports wherever he touches on his body feels sharp. So you can hear his version if you like. You can play that video at 10:10 and hear his version. Or listen to some of the rest of it. So the story, the guy touches his body. Anywhere he touches, he feels sharp, crippling pain. He touches his arm, feels sharp, crippling pain. He touches his leg, feels sharp, crippling pain. He touches his nose and feels sharp, crippling pain. He touches his ear and feels sharp, crippling pain. So he panics and then goes to a doctor for help. And after a brief examination, the doctor says, "Aha, I have identified the problem. Your finger is broken. Anywhere you touch, even not on your body, you will feel sharp crippling pain until that finger heals. Try using your other hand." Now, if you touch her and feel sharp crippling pain, consider that the pain may be from a broken finger, not from an injured furniture. Muji reveals the analogy next, and here's my rendering and comment on it. What that story is about this. Sharp crippling pain felt wherever the broken finger touches. When consciousness identifies itself as an isolated personality, then every external thing that the isolated personality interacts with may arouse suffering for the isolated personality. Sharp crippling suffering. Worry, agonizing, tension, whatever, suffering. For one external thing, there may be yearning and longing and frustration. And for another external thing, there may be repulsion and disgust and animosity and terror and complaint that there's longing and frustration and yearning. It's horrible. Such a problem. However, what if there is no suffering without the identifying of consciousness with an isolated personality, or as an isolated personality that can be offended, or can worry about earning its way into heaven, or can try to fix the ego, or fix its own suffering, or fix all the things that the ego blames for its suffering, or to rescue all sentient beings from evil and injustice and life? What if there can't be any suffering without the identifying of someone to suffer? What if suffering is not caused by external developments, not inherent to the external, but is caused solely by an internal reactive processing, an interpretation? What if the internal reactive processing can be noticed as just another passing development? That's just a meaning. It's just an interpretation. It's just an experience. It's just a labeling. What if the problem identified by the ego is never the source of the interpreted experience of the problem? What if the interpretive identifying of a problem is the source of the experience of something as a problem? In other words, the touching of it with the broken finger. Not the thing, but the touching of it with the broken finger creates this identification of, oh, that thing caused me pain. That arm, that injured furniture, that nose. What if the isolating and identifying of an external thing is an interpretive linguistic process, a labeling? And identifying and isolating and identifying. That's identifying is identifying. It's an interpretive linguistic process of isolating an object, like an external thing, an object, an objectification of process, of wave, of functionality. Oh, there's a form. Where? In the word, in the naming, in the labeling. Form isn't out there. We form forms in our speaking. Uh-oh. We sound very powerful. Can there be a problem
found in a malfunctioning car without someone there to identify not just the external conditions of the car as problematic, but even to identify the car itself. You can't have a problem in a car unless someone identifies the car. There has to be someone there. If there's a pile of metal, it's not a malfunctioning pile of metal, but just a pile of metal. However much it functions as something else, as a refrigerator, as a car, as a microwave oven, those are distinct from the fact that it is a pile of metal or whatever. However, if the pile of metal is a car also that is not functioning well as a car, then that pile of metal is also a malfunctioning car. It's valid to label it, interpret it that way, give it that meaning. Finally, for someone to have a problem with the fact that the car is malfunctioning, there has to be someone there to have that problem, to interpret and isolate the problem into existence, to create the problem, to create the malfunctioning car, to create the pile of metal, to notice. So this is all drawing attention to the process of noticing. We might say the one doing the noticing, but what if there's no one? There's just noticing. Attention itself does not have any problems. Noticing the problems. Consciousness prior to identification, like as an isolated personality, does not have any problems. Only isolated identifyings of this but not that can experience problems. Problems must be identified as problems, or else they might just be a scrap of metal, a pile of scrap metal. Maybe that pile of scrap metal is just a resource of several useful parts to repair some other malfunctioning car. How do you know it's a problem without a you to know? There's no problem in the pile of metal. There can be a problem with the pile of metal, though. For there to be a problem with a pile of metal, there has to be someone there to make that pile of metal into a problem. For there to be a for there to be a problem with a pile of metal, there must be someone with that particular pile of metal. Problem with a pile of metal requires someone with a pile of metal. The pile of metal is independent of the problem and totally innocent. The injured furniture isn't the source of the pain that's sharp and crippling and the broken finger. However, along comes the broken finger of the ego, which touches the pile of metal and says, oh, this pile of metal should be what it is not, and should not be what it is, and all that. The ego makes the pile of metal into a problem. In fact, without anyone to identify the pile of metal as a pile of metal, no one could have a problem with it by making it into a problem. Labeling it as a problem, interpreting it as a problem, creating it as a problem. A classic Zen koan is this: if a tree falls in the forest, but there's no one to see it falling, did it fall? So if a piece of furniture causes crippling pain whenever it's touched, but there's no broken finger to touch it, is it still a crippling piece of painful furniture? If the pile of scrap metal is the source of a serious problem, but there's no one there to have that problem with it, or even to make it into a problem, is it still the source of a serious problem, blocking the ego from earning its way, rightfully deserved, into a painfully distant heaven set up by a cruel, stingy God as a punishing torture of shaming for not being how you really should have already been, always, all along? Obviously, anyone who can fix a car can fix a car, but is the car a problem? Does it need to be fixed? Does anyone need to fix it? Or is there just a car and then someone who needs to fix it? Or put it this way, is there a someone who needs to fix it and then a car appears that needs to be fixed by the someone? Does the car need anything? Or need to be fixed? Should it already be functional, or should everything be exactly however it is, including however it may or may not change, or already be changing suddenly, now, dramatically, drastically, totally, I don't know, or maybe not? Should the ego be different? Maybe more like a needy car, or painful furniture, or less like a broken finger. An ego may need the car to be fixed. An ego may need the car to be different than it is. And because maybe the ego wants to be different than it is. An ego may have lots of needs and lots of shoulds and musts and can'ts and won'ts and nevers. However, and here's the really good news, you are not an ego. You are consciousness. You as consciousness have an ego. In fact, you as consciousness have all of them. Consciousness has all egos, assuming that there's really more than one, given that they all seem to be rather similar. Which reminds me of a story I once heard about a broken finger. Anywhere that one broken finger touched, there was all this painful, crippling stuff out there. Furniture and legs, and tabletops and noses. Everything was crippling painfully to that broken finger. So the ego may have lots of problems. It may even need to have a lot of problems. It may need to have a lot of problems to fix. Maybe it should try and solve them and fix them and prevent them. Maybe it must do that. However, and this might be a bit of a problem, maybe it can't do what it must and should. Yeah, I know. Feel sorry for it, huh? Or maybe it is stubborn and just won't, even though, of course, it really should and absolutely must. To get rid of all the ego's problems, recognize that the problems are your mentors as well as your creations. You created the ego and its problems to mentor yourself, didn't I? This is called crazy wisdom. This is called sheer foolishness. This is also called introspection. This is even called Advaita in Sanskrit, or the yoga of inquiry, as in dhyana, jhana, or jhan, or zan. This is even called life after suffering. The ego doesn't you and never could. You were the vine which has a branch called ego. You made that branch out of yourself. That entire branch is totally composed of vine. The branch doesn't limit the vine. The ego doesn't limit you. You made the ego. You're the source of the ego. The ego is an expression of you, amongst other expressions. But that expression, or that vine, that expression or that branch, does have some serious problems. Plus, it is your branch, though it is not the whole vine. It's your branch. You're responsible for it. Because you're the vine. So you're responsible for your own expressions and creations, right? But it's not the whole vine. Maybe that branch has a problem with every other part of the vine, but that's not your problem either. You're not the isolated branch. You're the whole vine. The vine just grows branches, including one or more painful, crippling branches with serious problems involving taking life personally. However, there could be such a thing as life after taking things personally. There could be life after suffering. Or maybe there's life and suffering. Not life after suffering. There's just life and suffering instead of life with suffering. But life and suffering may be a radically different interpretive experience than a life of suffering, a life as suffering, a life of problems, a life as a problem, or a problem with life itself that lasts forever. Or longer. I hereby request that I stop having a problem with life and instead have, at worst, a life that is entirely composed of serious, crippling, painful problems. For instance, consider this serious, crippling, and painful problem, which requires you to devote the rest of your life to almost solving it, but not quite. Ready? Okay. If a broken finger feels tremendous pain whenever it pushes up against an ego that is taking life personally, but you are not the ego taking life personally that the alleged broken finger would allegedly push up against, are you absolutely sure that it isn't a broken finger or not? In conclusion, I hereby accuse you of being totally innocent of the alleged crime of either taking life personally or failing miserably to do so. Maybe you should seriously try harder to become what you already have always been. You must, in fact. I demand it. I prohibit you and forbid you from
taking life not seriously enough. Only take it just as seriously. Oh, I meant to say not personally enough. Only take it just as personally as you are. No more, no less. Weird, crazy wisdom.